Welcome back, everyone. Today we are looking at the resurrection of Christ, and there's a lot to cover. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk about Jesus' disciples and how they saw him. They saw him in many different postures. They've seen him walking straight and tall as the example of righteousness. They've seen him pointing his fingers at the Pharisees. They've seen him kneeling down to wash their feet. And now they've seen him on a cross, dying for their sins. If this would have been the last thing that the disciples saw of Jesus, this would have been a very sad story. Good news is that Jesus did rise. He was resurrected. And the disciples got to see him again, this time in a different way. As you see, there can be no Easter faith without Easter fact. Without the fact of resurrection, we cannot have Christianity, the religion. If Christ didn't resurrect, then we have no faith, no religion. This is the cornerstone on which we build our entire religion, our entire faith. And so today's study is going to be talking about the facts and the events of the resurrection. I posted a document that had all of this with the actual verses that accompany them. And so I really want you to look at that and use that as your reference point for your verses. But I'm just going to talk about some of these things. So, after the crucifixion, we have Jesus entombed. And so he was put in a tomb, and we have evidence of that in 3 different verses. And then after that, we have the evidence from Scripture of Christ being resurrected. And so we have the empty tomb, which is cool to think about the fact that the angel didn't have to move the stone in order for Jesus to be resurrected. The stone being moved was more for the people to come inside and see evidence. So that's interesting to think about. But the tomb was opened, and then he was seen by many people, by the women, by Peter and John, and then his many appearances to the women. And so after his resurrection, we get to his appearances to all of the disciples for this 40 days, or 4 to 5 weeks. So we have the Sunday afternoon where Jesus makes himself, he appears to Peter, he appears to 2 disciples, and then he appears to the disciples, all of them except for Thomas. The next Sunday, we see that Jesus appears again to the disciples, this time with Thomas. Next, we get to the 4 to 5 weeks where Jesus appears to the disciples at the Sea of Galilee. He again appears to the disciples and 500 believers on top of a mountain. Then he appears to James, and then he appears to the disciples that are in Jerusalem. So all of these people got to see the resurrected Christ. That is very important evidence for his resurrection. And then tomorrow we'll talk more about the ascension. On top of the events, we can also think about some other key things that are essential for the resurrection of Christ. Things like conversions, like people coming to the faith, sort of like how Saul became Paul because Christ interacted with him. Then we can think about 2,000 years of the church and its testimony to Christ's resurrection. All these things just compile on top of each other to prove Christ's resurrection. And finally, so much depends upon the resurrection of Christ. Just think about how all the following things are dependent upon the resurrection of Christ. The efficiency of the atoning blood of Christ, the fellowship with God, the conquest of the fear of death and judgment, the assurance of the truth of God's promises, and real existence of believers in heaven. Without the resurrection, are any of those things really trustworthy or possible or true? can't really stress just how important the resurrection is to us as believers. But hopefully, if you take the time to read some of these passages and to see the events of the resurrection, you'll understand the whole resurrection idea a little bit more. Thank you very much, and go ahead and enjoy reading all the events of the resurrection. Thank you very much.